Good morning. Welcome to the Meristem Minute. This morning we have our guest speaker, Peter Rousonelos. He is going to hit on a hot topic right now. So microbes and biologicals is something that's really trending in the ag space. And so he's going to talk to us about biology is fertility. So welcome, Peter.
Good morning, Melanie. Thanks for having me and having me available to have the opportunity to talk about this. I think biology and fertility, they go hand in hand. So I do a lot of grower meetings, and I know you do, and a lot of people within our group. And one thing that I say a lot at the grower meetings is, biology is fertility. Think about when you're looking at incorporating biology into your fertilizer program or into your farm operation. What you're really doing is you're applying fertilizer. And the reason is though we apply synthetic fertilizer, and that's been a common practice, both through, dry applications, obviously our typical nitrogen applications, and we utilize a lot of starter fertilizers in some markets, both in furrow and 2x2. And so we've been using a lot of synthetic fertilizers, but we don't think about sometimes how biology is impacted or what biology can do to impact nutrient availability, not only of our synthetic fertilizers, but also to work with the soil as to what is already there and that we just can't access. So a lot of times, I think there's a lot of buzz around biology, and there's a lot of, I shouldn't say confusion, but there's uncertainty. People don't know, okay, I hear a lot about biology and these different microbes and these different biologicals, but, what are they doing for me? And so I think what we try to do is break down here how those forms of biology can really positively impact nutrient availability and what we can make available to the crop. So as you see here, one thing we touch on is synthetic fertilizers. Nothing wrong with synthetic fertilizers. We're not saying don't use them. We're not going to go out here as an organization and say don't use fertilizer, use this instead. I believe there's a happy marriage between synthetic fertilizer and the use of the right biologicals in a fertilizer system. So, and a lot of that is because synthetic fertilizers alone are very inefficient. It makes a comment here about 15 to 25% of applied phosphorus, and really you can include potassium in a lot of those cases as well, is what's available this year out of your synthetic fertilizer. Now, that can vary. That's a pretty common number. I've got guys I talk to and they'll say, oh, I'm lucky to get 5 or 10. And then some people say, 20 to 25. So 15 to 25 is pretty common. And a lot of that is that fertilizer ties up in the soil. It has to break down, has to solubilize when we apply products like DAP, MAP, get our potash out there, even when we're utilizing 1034O, whether it's ortho poly-based phosphates, they tie up and they don't become available. So only about 15 to 25% is what's available to that crop. And so what happens is, because of that, we have to apply a lot. So when I use starter fertilizer as an example, we'll put on 5 gallon of a 1034O based product in furrow, which is quite a bit of phosphate. But really the reason we have to do that is because if we only get about 10% of that, we're really just getting a couple pounds of phosphate available to that crop early. And that couple pounds is what's bringing a lot of value. But the rest of that phosphate is tying up in the soil. And it's kind of shows that here on this chart, where you look at that soil solution P and that what's available for plant uptake, that's that gold box. And that gold box is what we're trying to, that's the pool we want to have as large as possible. When you look off to either side of that box, those are forms of phosphate that are unavailable. And we have to figure out how to take that unavailable phosphate and make it available. And the way we do that is utilizing different biological products in the market that we'll get into talking about here later. But what we look at Meristem and what we're promoting is, as you see there on the lower left hand of the screen, is we're looking at incorporating nutrient solubilizing microbes, different enzyme technologies that unlock and drive available phosphate, and residue managing products that help drive nutrients out of residue to the crop. So a lot of things I'll also mention, I talk about potassium and the fact that we don't have a lot of potassium available in season. Potassium is affected in a lot of ways. Here we talk a lot about phosphorus, but potassium is also affected in a lot of ways negatively through base saturations and things like that you have to manage differently. But what we'll notice in a lot of years is we can put on a lot of potassium up front, but we get dry, we don't get the potassium uptake. And so there's ways that we can help influence that as well. And we'll get into that in the conversation. So with that, as we break down those different, we talked in the previous slide, I talked a lot about inefficiency of synthetic fertilizers. We actually can get antagonism. We can actually tie up other available nutrients when we over apply synthetic fertilizers, and that when we utilize biology, it can help increase availability of overall nutrients. So kind of what does that mean? What we're really going with here is you can see these 3 steps, these kind of 3 areas that we really look at impacting nutrient availability at the farm gate. And so with that, I think one huge source of fertilizer that we have out there is our crop residue. So crop residue, universities, University of Illinois in specific, we've heard them speak at a lot of meetings. Dr. Fred Belo's done a lot of work on this and his group that talk about the value of crop residue. On these 200 bushel plus corn crops, we've got a significant amount of value in the field in the form of residue. About 50% of our corn is left in the field, and it's about the same with soybeans. We leave a lot out there. People don't even think about the fact that soybean residue adds up as well. But there's a lot of nutrients, and when we can break down and make those nutrients available to this year's crop, that next crop, that the nutrients that are come out of that residue are actually plant available. It's in a form the plant wants to utilize. So anything we can move, obviously Mother Nature breaks down residue, but if we can do it more timely, then we can make those nutrients available to that year's crop. And the impact I've seen on that, again, I focused on potassium a little bit and some of the impacts we have where we can't get potassium into the crop. I think managing your residue effectively helps quite a bit in driving available potassium to that crop in season. Seen that in many different aspects. When soybeans are hitting about R1, they're starting to really surge for potassium. When corn's hitting that V8 stage to VT stage, it's surging for potassium, and that's typically when we can't get it. It's too dry. We just aren't getting the conditions to mobilize the potassium. And if we can get it out of that residue in that plain available form of potassium, it's almost like a side dress strip is what I call it. It's almost like a side dress strip of potassium at that point. Another thing that we look at is nitrogen is a huge part of what we're doing out here when we're looking at driving yields. And I think we look at how we most effectively manage our nitrogen. There are biologically friendly products out there that help us manage that nitrogen from loss. Obviously, we've got a lot of products out here that focus on killing off biologicals to help stabilize that nitrogen. I'm not a fan of that because we're trying to create a soil friendly environment, soil health. We want to have biological activity. So I don't like to utilize products that go against that concept. So there are products out there that help manage nitrogen. We don't use the word stabilize, we use words manage, right? How do we keep that nitrogen in that soil profile so we get more uptake of the applied nitrogen? And then finally, I think a huge component to using fertilizer more effectively is focusing on our root system. If we cast a bigger net, we're going to catch more fish. So the bigger root system we have out there means it's going to be able to intercept more nutrients. So if we're utilizing biologicals to break down and make more nutrients available, then we've got a bigger root system to take up those nutrients and drink up those nutrients. So we need to focus on how to build large root systems, as big a root systems as possible right out of the gate. Get that crop off to a good start and make more nutrients plant available and make sure that we can actually use them.
Peter, I think that's really key as we're driving for these high yields. See a lot of farmers increasing their population. And when you increase that population, we see those root systems really minimize in size. So anything we can do to help drive them to continue to be larger, like you said, and take up more nutrients is really key. So Peter, gosh, what great information. So what products are out here? There's so many out here, but what products have you seen success with? And what would you recommend for really this biology is fertility concept to drive these huge root systems and this high fertility base?
So basically it comes down to implementation, and we look at, this biology is fertility concept. So when we're thinking about making a fertilizer spend and coming up here, even though we're in the middle of summer and we're in the middle of that growing season, and we're going to be thinking about how to spend our dollars on fertility as we go into this next crop. We're going to have prepay coming out on dry fertilizer and prepay on nitrogen in a lot of markets. And so, thinking about this biology as fertility, making sure that we have dollars available to incorporate it so that we create an overall system. So how to implement that is really, it comes down to sometimes a reallocation of dollars, taking some of the dollars you would have spent on fertilizer and look at moving some of those dollars over to biology. Again, it's not about taking the fertilizer completely out. In some cases, if you got real high P levels and real high K levels, there's opportunities where you likely could take it out. Work with your local agronomist. Look at your soil test to make those final decisions. But in general, we can reallocate some dollars out of that fertilizer spend to a biology spend and get more use out of our nutrients. So, as an example, we talked about crop residue and the importance of crop residue. Meristem has a product called Excavator. Following every crop or in front of every crop, this product can be applied to reduce that organic material, the plant available nutrients. This is a real important part of this biology as fertility concept, because as we mentioned, that there's a huge factory out there of fertilizer in the form of stover. Whether you're no-till, whether you're minimal till, or even if you worked it and you've got that, basically what you've done is you've taken that residue and just mixed it around. But it's still there. It's still in the upper inches of the soil profile. And an application of Excavator following that harvest, and in some markets, if that's not possible, putting it on in the spring with your spring chemistry, utilizing that application timing to put on the Excavator will still give us in-season opportunity to cycle those nutrients and make them available to this year's crop. If we rely on Mother Nature and mineralization, a lot of guys, I hear it all the time. This year my crop was better because mineralization was better. And if we can take more control of that mineralization and make sure that we're bringing availability of that residue more effectively and more timely, we're going to get significant amount more nutrients. We see a lot of times, people talk numbers, but here recently I was just in a conversation where we saw 20 to 30 additional pounds of P and K coming out of the crop. And in some cases, we've had even more than that. So again, I've looked at that potassium and how do we get in-season potassium? And this residue is a big part of it. Another way we look at it, when we look at planting, I think at plant is a really important time. We've got, as you mentioned, Melanie, we've got thicker plant populations. That means smaller root systems. That means less effective rooting area. So we have to look at how we precisely place our nutrients. We're hearing a lot about people root zone banding, banning their fertilizer. We're doing that because they're wanting to get those nutrients right where that root system is, because we've changed our planting populations in the way that, and the amount of area that root actually can intercept nutrients is a lot smaller. So Revline hopper throttle planter box treatments from Meristem create a robust root structure. They increase nutrient availability in the root zone. Again, it's a precise application. We get that, utilize that talc graphite product, apply it right at the planter, and that gets the nutrients and some biologicals and microbes that influence nutrient uptake, nutrient availability, and root systems, and put that right on the seed. So with those, we can take those smaller root systems and we can enhance them, make them larger, make them as large as possible, so we intercept as many nutrients as possible. And then in addition to that, we're adding other biologicals that are specific to nutrient solubility, as we talked about in the first slide, where we want to make that box of available nutrients underneath of that crop as big as possible. That's what we're doing with the biologicals that are in Revline hopper throttle. And in addition to that, we have some enzymes in the form of the ether component that we mentioned here that really help drive that early phosphate availability. And so with that, I know there's a segment that uses in-furrow-based starter as well. And so here we mentioned, that is an inefficient form. 1030 furrow-based fertilizers, they're just inefficient. You just don't get that much availability, and we can utilize products like Upshift C that's powered by ether. Again, the enzymes that drive phosphate availability, and we'll give it the same amount of early phosphate within the product that we're used to getting out of 1030 furrow, but we're able to drive additional phosphate availability in season with the enzymes. You can also, in some traditional markets where, you know, you're still putting on dry fertilizer, and if your retailer has access to the ability to impregnate or put on products on the dry fertilizer prill, there are enzyme-based products out there. There's some that have been out for years. They work very effective, but applied directly to the fertilizer prill. Again, this is another way that we incorporate biology, and we can do that utilizing a product called Fuel Line. And finally, on the nitrogen, really consider managing your nitrogen with biologically friendly products. Within Meristem's lineup, we have a product called Maintain Elite and a product called End Gear Dual Action. And basically the way those products work, they don't focus on killing off biologicals to manage that nitrogen from loss and to keep it available. What they do is they manage their calcium polymer-based product that captures that nitrogen and keeps it up near that root system. The nitrogen is available. It is available to the crop, but it's being held, or it's almost like a synthetic net, like we're helping hold it up in that upper inches of the soil profile and increasing nitrogen uptake. So it's really more of a nitrogen use efficiency product, and we'll get more uptake of that nitrogen. So in general, just to kind of sum all that up, there's a lot there, but when we talk about biology as fertility, it's putting on your synthetic fertilizers, but save some dollars. A lot of cases, what we talked about here, you're going to spend about $30 an acre. So if necessary, reallocate that $30 spend out of some of that P&K and move that into biology to make sure that we're getting the most effective system out here, so we can utilize the most nutrients in the next season.
Gosh, Peter, what great information. You've really summed up a lot of different ways that can help really keep soil health front focused, as well as keep yields high. So thank you so much for your time and information. And community, that is your Meristem Minute. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Melanie.